What you doing, guys? So you registered the books now? It's ready? It's going to be printed?
Not yet.
No, but I meant the day. You ordered. Day.
The best known theory of emotions, the Freudian, is a hodgepodge of platitude, banality, and rabbinical piety. Where do we go to find the scientific answer to the emotional question? Can you really bear to know? Emotions are the lowest form of consciousness. Emotional actions are the most contracted, narrowing, dangerous form of behavior. The romantic poetry and fiction of the last 200 years has quite blinded us to the fact that emotions are an active and harmful form of stupor. Any peasant can tell you that. Beware of emotions. Any child can tell you that. Watch out for the emotional person. He's a lurching lunatic. Emotions are caused by biochemical secretions in the body to serve during the state of acute emergency. An emotional person is a blind, crazed maniac. Emotions are addictive and narcotic and stupefacient. Do not trust anyone who comes on emotional. Emotions are all based on fear. Like an alcoholic or a junkie, the frightened person reaches for his favorite escape into action. Commanding, competing, punishing, aggressing, rebelling, complaining, abasing, submitting, placating, agreeing, fawning, flattering, giving. The emotional person cannot think. He cannot perform any effective game action. The emotional person is turned off sensually. His body is a churning robot. He has lost all connection with cellular wisdom or atomic revelation. The person in an emotional state is an inflexible robot gone berserk. What psychologists call love is emotional greed and self-enhancing gluttony based on fear. B, the psychedelic correlate. The only state in which we can learn, harmonize, grow, merge, understand is the absence of emotion. This is called bliss or ecstasy, attained through centering the emotions. Moods such as sorrow and joy accompany emotions. Like a junkie who has just scored or an alcoholic with a bottle in hand, the emotional person feels good when he has scored emotionally, i.e. beaten someone up or been beaten up, won a competitive victory, gorged himself on personal grabbing. Conscious love is not an emotion. It is serene merging with yourself, with other people, with other forms of energy. Love cannot exist in an emotional state. Only the person who has been psychotic or had a deep psychedelic trip can understand what emotions do to the human being. The great kick of the mystic experience, the exultant, ecstatic hit, is the sudden relief from emotional pressure. Did you imagine that there could be emotions in heaven? Emotions are closely tied to ego games, like a stone. Check your emotions at the door to paradise. Why then are emotions built into the human repertoire if they are so painful, demanding, and blinding? There is a basic survival purpose. Emotions are the emergency alarms. The organism at the point of death terror goes into a paroxysm of frantic activity, like a fish flipping blindly out of water, like a crazed, cornered animal. There are rare times when emotions are appropriate and relevant, a reflex biochemical spurt, flight or fight. But the sensible animal avoids situations which elicit fear and the accompanying emotion. Your wise animal prefers to relax or to play, using his senses tuned into his delicious body organ music, closing his eyes to drift back in cellular memory. Dogs and cats are high all the time, except when bad luck demands emotional measures. The emotional human being is an evolutionary drug addict, continuously and recklessly shooting himself up with adrenaline and other dark ferments. The way to turn off the emotions is to turn on the senses, turn on to your body, turn on your cellular reincarnation circus, turn on to the electric glow within, and engage only in turn-on ego games. 7. The ultimate escape question, the scientific answer. The question is, how does it end? The answer is, it doesn't. Ask any scientist, no matter which level of energy he studies, and he'll tell you it keeps going at the same beat, on, off, atomic, galaxies flash on and then off, cellular, species flare out and then retract, somatic, the heart beats and stops, the lungs inhale and exhale, sensory, light comes in waves of particles hurtling against retinal beaches, high tide we see, low tide we don't see. A neural message dot dashes along the nerve fibers. Light, dark. Light, dark. Sound waves pile up on the auditory membrane and fall back. Sound, silence. Sound, silence. There is no form of energy which does not come in the same rhythm. Yin, yang. In, out. The galaxy itself and every structure within it is a binary business, an oscillating dance. Start, stop. There is only one level of consciousness that cannot accept the universal on-off switch, and that is the ego. Ego is unable to learn from the past or to predict the obvious events of the future because of its deep dread of confronting mortality. Ego focuses consciousness on the few immediately neighboring pieces of the game board because ego knows that one glance across the game board or beyond puts the whole thing in perspective, where it began and how it will end. Start, stop. Off, on. The Buddha's loving parents tried to make sure their son would not consider the 4 chess pieces that lead off the game board: sickness, age, death, and the magician guru. Oriental philosophy points out that every form is an illusion, Maya. Everything at every level of energy is a shuttling series of vibrations as apparently solid as the whirring metal disc made by rotating fan blades. Ego resists this notion and touches the immediate solidity of phenomena. We dislike slowing the motion picture down because the film flickers. Annoying reminder that we view not unbroken continuity, but an off-on ribbon of still pictures. Life is an illusion. There 1 second, gone the next. Now you see it, now you don't. Death is equally illusory. Suicide a farce. The desire to escape is exactly as pointless as the desire to hang on to life. How can you clutch onto or escape from a relentless click-clack process that continues despite the mind's interpretation and despite our feelings about it? Hell is the idea that the game switch won't turn off. Suicide is the deluded attempt to escape from hell. Hell is a mistake in judgment, a bum trip idea, the ego's stranglehold on the film projector. Ego is caught in a repetitious loop, over and over and over. Suicide is the escape from ego. Only ego contemplates escape. Can you imagine an animal killing itself in egocentric peak? Ego attempts to turn itself off through anesthesia, unconsciousness, fast suicide or slow narcosis. Alcohol dulls the mind game and produces emotional stupor. Too much alcohol provides the anesthetic escape. Have you ever talked to an articulate junkie? The appeal of heroin is the void, the warm, soft cocoon of nothingness, surcease, easeful death, the vacuum gamble. The game of the junkie is to nod out, to pass over the line into unconsciousness. The last thought of the junkie as he slips away is, have I gone too far this time? Overdose? Au revoir or goodbye? B. The psychedelic correlate. The deep psychedelic experience is a death rebirth flip. You turn on to the ancient rhythm and you become its beat. All right now, are you ready? The whole thing is about to click off. The successful mystic is he who goes with it, lets it happen. Hello, goodbye. Hello, goodbye. Oh my God, you again? The bad trip, the LSD panic, is the terrorized reluctance to go with it, frantic grabbing for the intangible switch. Ego cries, keep it on! The glory of the psychedelic moment is the victory over life and death, won by seeing the oscillating dance of energy and yielding to it. Yielding to the oscillating dance of energy. The age-old appeal of the psychedelic experience is its solution to the problem of escape. The visionary revelation answers the escape question. There is no death. Ecstatic, mirthful relief. There is nothing to avoid, nothing to escape, nothing to fear. There is just off on, in out, start stop, light dark, flash delay. Death, void, oblivion is the split-second pause. I accept the on, I accept the off. It is of interest that the heroin addict and the illuminated Buddha end up at the same place, the void. The junkie is a deeply religious person. The alcoholic is too. Thus, our physicians and psychiatrists have no luck in curing addicts. If you see an addict as a social misfit, a civic nuisance who must be rehabilitated, you're completely missing the point. To cure the junkie and the alcoholic, you accept the cosmic validity of his search to transcend the game, and you help him see that blackout drugs are just bad methodology because you just can't keep holding the off switch, and that the way to reach the void is through psychedelic rather than anesthetic experience. Drugs are the religion of the people. The only hope is dope. From the theological standpoint, everybody must discover the seven faces of God within his own body. Each level of energy requires its own methods and language. The entire study of consciousness, the religious experience itself, remains in a state of medieval ignorance and superstition. There is no language for describing states of awareness. Religious scholars and theologians quarrel, not just about moral fads and ritual paraphernalia, but more basically about the answers to the seven basic questions. The humanistic sciences, neurology, psychology, psychiatry, psychopharmacology, and the study of consciousness, which I call religion, require a systematic language which will allow men to distinguish which levels of energy and consciousness they deal with. It is rather unfortunate that Western man developed a language of physics and chemistry and a highly efficient engineering based on physical-chemical experimentation long before he developed understanding and control of his own sense organs and neurological conditioning. Thus, we now have a situation where blind, irrational, technical robots who understand neither their makeup nor the purpose of life are in control of powerful and dangerous energies. A conversation with Alan Watts. Alan, what is the purpose of life? That is the question. What do you mean? The question of life is to ask the question, what is the purpose of life? Is to ask the question, what is the purpose of life? Is to ask the question, what is the purpose of life? The only purpose of life is the religious quest, the religious question. But you must be careful how you put the question, because the level at which you ask is the level at which you will be answered. I've suggested 7 levels of energy and consciousness, which are based on the anatomy or structure of the human body and its constituent parts: neurological, somatic, cellular, molecular. The religions of the future must be based on these 7 scientific questions. A science of consciousness must be based on those different levels, which center on the body and the biochemicals, i.e. drugs, which alter consciousness. So as has been already stated, from the theological standpoint, everyone must discover the 7 faces of God within his own body. This task, which at first glance may seem fantastically utopian, is actually very easy to initiate because there now exist instruments which can move consciousness to any desired level. The laboratory equipment for experimental theology, for internal science, is of course made of the stuff of consciousness itself, made of the same material as the data to be studied. The instruments of systematic religion are chemicals, drugs, dope. If you are serious about your religion, if you really wish to commit yourself to the spiritual quest, you must learn how to use psychochemicals. The message of religion, when approached hypothetically or rationally, is dimly grasped and never experienced, felt, or known. But there can be that staggering intellectual game ecstasy which comes to you when you begin to sense the complexity of the plan. To pull back the veil and see for a second a fragment of the energy dance, the life power. How can you appreciate the divine unless you comprehend the smallest part of the fantastic design? To experience, it's always for just a moment, the answers to the 7 basic spiritual questions is to me the peak of the religious scientific quest. Drugs are the religion of the 21st century. Pursuing the religious life today without using psychedelic drugs is like studying astronomy with the naked eye, because that's how they did it in the 1st century AD. If God were to take you on a visit through his workshop, do you think you'd walk or go by bus? Do you really think it would be a stroll through a celestial Madame Tussauds waxworks? Dear friends, the divine product is evident in every macroscopic form, in every secular event. The divine product we can see, but the divine process operates in time dimensions which are far beyond our routine, secular, space-time limits. Wave vibrations, energy dance, cellular transactions. Our science describes this logically. Our brains may be capable of dealing with these processes experientially. So here we are. The great process is placed in our hands, a key to this direct visionary world. Is it hard for us to accept that the key might be an organic molecule and not a new myth or a new word? There is, of course, the expected opposition, the classic conflict of the religious drama, always changing, always the same. The doctrine, which was originally someone's experience, now threatened by the new experience. As educated men with an eye for history, you are, I trust, beginning to suspect that we've been through this many times before. The 7 tongues of God and their psychedelic correlates. Number 7. The anesthetic state is produced by narcotics, barbiturates, and large doses of alcohol. Anyone can reach the void just by self-administration of stupefacients. Most Americans know just how to pass out. 6. The state of emotional stupor is produced by moderate doses of alcohol. 3 martinis do nicely. 5. The state of ego consciousness is enhanced by pep pills, energizers consumed daily by millions of Americans. Pep pills make you feel good, make you feel active. They change nothing, but they propel you into game motion. Coffee, tea, and Coca-Cola are mild versions. 4. The state of sensory awareness is produced by any psychedelic drug. LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, MDA, yahe, hashish, Serenil, DMT. But the specific direct trigger for turning on the senses is marijuana. 3. The state of somatic awareness is attained by any psychedelic drug stronger than marijuana, but the specific triggers for chakra consciousness are hashish and MDA. 2. The cellular level of consciousness is attained by any of the stronger psychedelics: peyote, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin. 1. The atomic electronic level of consciousness is produced by the most powerful psychedelics: LSD, STP, DMT. In conclusion, I will say that your brain is your own. Intelligent, open collaboration can expand your mind with words and with drugs. Only ignorance and misinformation can allow someone else to control it, with their own words, with their own drugs, or with their imaginary fears. We are least vulnerable and strongest when we are well informed. Facts are the defense against any weapon. and particularly the psychological weapons of fear and helplessness. So keep yourself well informed, keep your consciousness turned on, and always remember, just say KNOW. Just say no. upstream against the 2 billion year tide of cellular evolution. Mr. Leary, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned from the personal use of LSD? First and last, the understanding that basic to the life impulse is the question, should we go on with life? This is the only real issue when you come down to it in the evolutionary cosmic sense, whether to make it with a member of the opposite sex and keep it going, or not to. At the deepest level of consciousness, this question comes up over and over again. I've struggled with it in scores of LSD sessions. How did we get here and into this mess? How do we get out? There are two ways out of the basic philosophic isolation of man. You can bawl your way out by having children, which is an immortality of the sort, or you can step off the wheel. Buddhism, the most powerful psychology that man has ever developed, says essentially that. My choice, however, is to keep the life game going. I'm Hindu, not Buddhist. Who wrote the cosmic script? What does the DNA code expect of me? Is the big genetic code show live or on tape? Who is the sponsor? Are we completely trapped inside our nervous systems, or can we make real contact with anyone else out there? Mr. Leary, what role do you think psychedelics will play in the everyday life of the future? A starring role. These chemicals will inevitably revolutionize our procedures of education, child rearing, and social behavior. Within one generation, these chemical keys to the nervous system will be used as regular tools of learning. You will not be asking your children when they come home from school, not what books are you reading, but which molecules are you using to open up new libraries of Congress inside your nervous system. There's no doubt that chemicals will be the central method of education in the future. The reason for this, of course, is that the nervous system, and learning and memory itself, is a chemical process. A society in which a large percentage of the population changes consciousness regularly and harmoniously with psychedelic drugs will bring about a very different way of life. Mr. Leary, will the psychedelic experience become universal? Will everyone be turned on? Well, not all the time. There will always be some functions that require a narrow form of consciousness. You don't want your airplane pilot flying higher than the plane and having Buddhist revelations in the cockpit. Just as you don't play golf on Times Square, you don't want to take LSD where narrow, symbol-manipulating attention is required. In a sophisticated way, you'll attune the desired level of consciousness to the particular surrounding that will feed and nourish you. No one will commit his life to any single level of consciousness. Sensible use of the nervous system would suggest that a quarter of our time will be spent in symbolic activities, producing and communicating in conventional tribal ways. But the fully conscious life schedule will allow considerable time, perhaps an hour or two a day, devoted to the yoga of the senses, to the enhancement of sensual ecstasies through marijuana and hashish, and one day a week to completely moving outside the sensory and symbolic dimensions into the transcendental realms that are open to you through LSD. This is not science fiction fantasy. I have lived most of the last 6 years, until the recent unpleasantness, doing exactly that, taking LSD once a week and smoking marijuana once a day. Mr. Leary, how will this psychedelic regimen enrich human life? It will enable each person to realize that he is not a game-playing robot put on this planet to be given a social security number and to be spun on the assembly line of school, college, career, insurance, funeral, goodbye. Through LSD, each human being will be taught to understand that the entire history of evolution is recorded inside his body. The challenge of the complete human life will be for each person to recapitulate and experientially explore every aspect and vicissitude of this ancient and majestic wilderness. Each person will become his own Buddha, his own Einstein, his own Galileo. Instead of relying on canned, static, dead knowledge passed on from other symbol producers, he will be using his span of 80 or so years on this planet to live out every possibility of the human, pre-human, and even subhuman adventure. As more respect and time are diverted to these explorations, he will be less hung up on trivial, external pastimes. And this may be the natural solution to the problem of leisure. When all of the heavy work and mental drudgery is taken over by machines, what are we going to do with ourselves? Build even bigger machines? The obvious and only answer to this peculiar dilemma is that man is going to have to explore the infinity of inner space to discover the terror and adventure and ecstasy that lie within us all. Dropout or cop-out? It's always been that way, and will always be that way. There are two societies, two symbiotic cultures uneasily sharing this planet, two intertwined human structures, mirror image like root and branch. The overground and the underground, the dropouts and the cop-outs. There's the visual establishment, officious, federal, rational, organized, uniformed, at times grim, at times smug in its apparent control of external power, metal, machines, weapons, the cop-outs, the cops. And there's the dropout underground, loose, sloppy, foolish, tenacious, private, at times joyous, at times paranoid, protected by its camouflage, conspiratorial laughter, the knowing glance, the facade of poverty, long hair, out-of-fashion dress, the covert, subtle gesture, the double meaning sustained by its access to inner power, touch, taste, sensual connections, laughter, smell, moist contact, ecstasy. The external power structure is forever rent by struggles for material control, national rivalries, economic competition, political conflicts, ideologies of might. The boring battles of generals and politicians, the CIA versus the FBI, etc. The underground society is also divided on the basis of somatic, domestic, sensory, erotic, ritual, and chemical preferences. The battles of clans and cults, of magicians and saints. This ancient duality has reached an evolutionary crisis point today. To see what's happening, and it's never reported in the papers, you have to be aware of this overground-underground ballet. But to see it, you have to be underground. The overground establishment today just can't see what's happening, just can't accept the dedicated, enduring, inevitable existence of the underground. LBJ has no logical, rational categories to deal with the apolitical smile, that soft chuckle which comes from neither the left nor the right, but from some center within. In earlier, wiser times, this struggle was clearly recognized as the essential battle between God and the devil, in which the devil, who is always he who controls the external power, systematically switches the labels for obvious tactical reasons, and calls the static, regulated, dry, grim, humorless, destructive anti-life good, and calls the free, ecstatic, sensual, moist, funny, joyous bad. This doesn't fool the turned-on undergrounders, who are hip to the fact that God is a singing, swinging energy process who likes to laugh and make love, and burrow, murmuring deep underground. The underground is always aware of the existence and reflex responses of the overground. Survival in the underground depends on your ability to anticipate the movements of external power. It's always been a capital crime to laugh, to make love, and turn on barefoot in front of Whitey's house. And these are the endemic, chronic crimes of the giggling young, the colored, the artists, and the visionaries. The structure of the overground is always obsessively and specifically organized. Read the rule books and directories. Today, the whole freaky social structure is listed alphabetically in the yellow pages of the phone book. Conversely, the structure of the underground is equally explicit and obvious to those in the know, but this knowledge is experiential, whispered, word of mouth, friend to friend, and rarely written down. Can you write down a good joke? The telephone directory has no listing for the soft essences, the chemical secretions of life, love goddesses, alchemists, ecstasy drugs, astrologers, religious experiences, prophetic visions, fun, laughter, wry humor, the warm hand that slips under your pretenses and touches you in exactly the right place. Where are these classified? The underground is always composed of the outs, those who are alienated from the establishment power centers, involuntarily by deprivation or voluntarily by aesthetic religious choice. The young, the poor, the racially rejected, the articulately sensitive, the spiritually turned on, are curious, sensual, ecstatic, erotic, shameless, free, mischievous, rebellious, intuitive, humorous, playful, and spiritual. Adults, the middle class, the cops, the government men, the educators, those people listed in the yellow pages are not. No funny business here, this is serious. In the past, the polar tension between the two societies was balanced by the slow ebb and flow tide of history. Underground pressure builds up gradually over decades, and eventually an ecstatic upheaval occurs from below. Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, then slowly a new hierarchy emerges. Now, you see, don't you, that you learn nothing about the psychedelic underground and the electronic generation from the establishment press? Hippie is an establishment label for a profound, invisible, underground, evolutionary process. For every visible hippie, barefoot, beflowered, beaded, there is 1,000 invisible members of the turned-on underground, persons whose lives are tuned into their inner vision, who are dropping out of the TV comedy of American life. Parents, if you want to understand what these new kids are doing, you have to tune in to the communication channels that carry the underground message. Read their newspapers. Every city in the country has its underground paper serving its young readers with the news they want and advertising the commodities they want and the language they understand. The East Village Other, the Oracle of San Francisco, or the Oracle of Los Angeles, for example. Read any college newspaper that is relatively free of faculty control. Also, listen to their music. The rock and roll bands are the philosopher poets of the new religion. Their beat is the pulse of the future. The message from Liverpool is the newest testament, chanted by the four evangelists, St. John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Pure Vedanta, divine revelation, gentle, tender irony at the insanities of war and politics, sorrowful lament for the bourgeois loneliness, delicate hymns of glory to God. To learn the lesson from your kids, you've got to groove with their electronic, fluid, timeless point of view, which is both the newest and the oldest human philosophy, and accept their up-revision of Shakespeare in which Juliet's sleeping potion becomes a turn-on sacramental love elixir, and Romeo took it with her in the tomb and they laughed in ecstatic revelation and pity at that old posturing Montague Capulet hang-up, and they split together from Verona and opened up a little loot shop in Rome and stayed high forever after. And then Lady Bird Macbeth built a fire and lit a candle and some incense and put a tender chant on the stereo, rolled a joint of Scotch broom, and she and Macbeth sat looking into the dancing flame and got soft and high and saw how foolish it was to struggle for the throne, and dissolved into love for each other and for their rivals and prayed for them. Tune in. Get very comfortable and close your eyes and listen to the sermon from Liverpool. It could just as well be Donovan or Dylan or the Jefferson Airplane. And learn that it's the oldest message of love and peace and laughter. And trust in God and don't worry. Trust in the future and don't fight. Trust in the kids and don't worry because it's all beautiful and it's all right.
Au moins, leur t-shirt thermolactyle, vous êtes certain qu'ils ne l'enlèveront pas. Réchauffez toute la famille en boutique et sur damar.fr. Damar, le confort d'être vraiment moi.
6. The emotional question. A. The scientific answer. What should I move toward? What direction my motion? What should I feel? The emotional and feeling questions. Here science fails miserably to give us answers because there is little objective data, and the accepted theories of emotional behavior, the psychiatric, are naive, inadequate, pompously trivial. The best known theory of emotions, the Freudian, is a hodgepodge of platitude, banality, and rabbinical piety. All that Freud said is that modern man and society are completely dishonest. Society lies to the individual and forces him to lie to himself. Freud called this process of self-deception the unconscious. The unconscious is the hidden. Freud, the lie detector who lied, conscientiously listed the various ways in which man prevaricates and then developed a system of humiliating cross-examination and spirit-breaking brainwashing which forces the rare successful patient to give up his favorite pack of lies, which he chose as being the best solution to an impossible situation, and grovelingly to accept the psychoanalyst's system of dishonesty. Have you ever noticed how unbearably dead and useless psychoanalysts and their patients are? The only cheerful fact about psychoanalysis is that most patients don't get cured and are stubborn enough to preserve their own amateur and original lie in favor of the psychoanalyst's conforming lie. If anyone has any lingering doubt about the superstitious and barbarian state of psychiatry and psychoanalysis, reflect on this fact. Today, 50 years after Freud, the average mental hospital in the United States is a Kafkaesque, Orwellian, prison camp more terrifying than Dachau because the captors claim to be healers. 200 years ago our treatment of the village idiot and nutty old Aunt Agatha was gently utopian compared to the intolerant savagery of the best mental hospital. So where do we find the scientific answer to the emotional question? Can you really bear to know? Emotions are the lowest form of consciousness. Emotional actions are the most contracted, narrowing, dangerous form of behavior. The romantic poetry and fiction of the last 200 years has quite blinded us to the fact that emotions are an active and harmful form of stupor. Any peasant can tell you that. Beware of emotions. Any child can tell you that. Watch out for the emotional person. He is a lurching lunatic. Emotions are caused by biochemical secretions in the body to serve during the state of acute emergency. An emotional person is a blind, crazed maniac. Emotions are addictive and narcotic and stupefacient. Do not trust anyone who comes on emotional. What are the emotions? In a book entitled Interpersonal Diagnosis of Personality, written when I was a psychologist, I presented classifications of emotions and detailed descriptions of their moderate and extreme manifestations. Emotions are all based on fear. Like an alcoholic or a junkie, the frightened person reaches for his favorite escape into action. Commanding, competing, punishing, aggressing, rebelling, complaining, abasing, submitting, placating, agreeing, fawning, flattering, giving. The emotional person cannot think, he cannot perform any effective game action, except in acts of physical aggression and strength. The emotional person is turned off sensually. His body is a churning robot, he has lost all connection with cellular wisdom or atomic revelation. The person in an emotional state is an inflexible robot gone berserk. What psychologists call love is emotional greed and self-enhancing gluttony based on fear. B. The psychedelic correlate, the only state in which we can learn, harmonize, grow, merge, join, understand is the absence of emotion. This is called bliss or ecstasy, attained through centering the emotions. Moods such as sorrow and joy accompany emotions. Like a junkie who has just scored or an alcoholic with a bottle in hand, the emotional person feels good when he has scored emotionally, i.e., beaten someone up or been beaten up. Won a competitive victory. Gorged himself on person grabbing. Conscious love is not an emotion, it is serene merging with yourself, with other people, with other forms of energy. Love cannot exist in an emotional state. Only the person who has been psychotic or had a deep psychedelic trip can understand what emotions do to the human being. The great kick of the mystic experience, the exultant, ecstatic hit, is the sudden relief from emotional pressure. Did you imagine that there could be emotions in heaven? Emotions are closely tied to ego games. Check your emotions at the door to paradise. Why, then, are emotions built into the human repertoire if they are so painful, demanding, and blinding? There is a basic survival purpose. Emotions are the emergency alarms. The organism at the point of death terror goes into a paroxysm of frantic activity. Like a fish flipping blindly out of water. Like a crazed, cornered animal. There are rare times when emotions are appropriate and relevant. The reflex biochemical spurt. Flight or fight. There are times when emotional bluffs, like the hair rising on a dog's neck, are appropriate. But the sensible animal avoids situations which elicit fear and the accompanying emotion. Your wise animal prefers to relax or to play using his senses, tuned into his delicious body organ music, closing his eyes to drift back in cellular memory. Dogs and cats are high all the time except when bad luck demands emotional measures. The emotional human being is an evolutionary drug addict continuously and recklessly shooting himself up with adrenaline and other dark ferments. The way to turn off the emotions is to turn on the senses, turn on to your body, turn on to your cellular reincarnation circus, turn on to the electric glow within and engage only in turn on ego games.
You can be anything this time around. You can be anyone this time around. You can do anything this time around. You can be anyone.
Whatever happened to Timothy Leary? In December 1966, shortly after he founded the League for Spiritual Discovery, Dr. Leary was interviewed in Berkeley by Elsa Knight Thompson, who was then KPFA's Public Affairs Director. We hear first excerpts from their conversation.
3 months ago, we formed a new religion called League for Spiritual Discovery. Like every other religion, we have our own sacramental methods and our own goals, and we practice a religion in small groups privately. But like other religious groups, we have our public educational and demonstration ceremonies, which we call celebrations.
And the private ones are the esoteric side of the situation,
yes.
I gather. And the public ones are, as all religions have been, translated for the masses.
Or not so much the masses as the non-initiated or the non-communicants. This, of course, this may sound strange to Americans, but actually it's the most orthodox form of religion, and indeed it's not that much different from the way that, for example, the Catholic Church or the Jewish religion operates. You have your sacramental services, which are reserved to the communicants, and then you present to the public what your aspirations are, and you try to show people what you're discovering. So for the last 3 months in New York City, every Tuesday night we've been running what we call psychedelic religious celebration. Thousands of years men have been having what we now call psychedelic experiences. Mystics, visionaries, far-out artists and poets. And after you have this experience, you struggle, you hunger to communicate it, mainly, of course, for yourself. It's a way of reminding yourself what it was, but also to communicate to your fellow men. We think that every religious group in its origin has struggled to start a new art. And indeed, you can test the validity of any new religion by the art that it creates, because words, after all, are a fragile freight for carrying the deepest impulses of man. So like other religions of the past, we have developed our own art form. Rather, it is automatically developed. Psychedelic art is the public face or the communication device of our new religion. Now, what is psychedelic art? Psychedelic art is multi-energy. Instead of using one form of light or of movie or of slides, we will have up to 26 slide projectors and motion picture cameras or projectors going on one huge cinemascope screen. The screen is undulating with cellular forms and changing patterns, stroboscopic flashes, and swimming in and out of this Niagara of visual material are what we call mythic forms. It's as though your own protein memory banks, your genetic code is being decoded, and these millions of file cards that have been stored for thousands of years begin to flash. Each week in our celebration, we reenact or we renew one of the great ancient religious stories. We just finished doing the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. At the present time, we're doing the illumination of the Buddha. These great religious figures of the past are men who have been turned on and who have worked out a new metaphor for stating the divine plan or the way things are. And we seek to use modern methods, electronic and multimedia, to turn on the audience. The aims and goals of our religion are highly orthodox. We seek to find the divinity within, call that what you will. But it's been well known for thousands of years that man can focus his microscope inside and turn on to energies and revelations which are built into your nervous system and your cells. Your body is an instrument of communication which has been around for 2 billion years, and there's a lot to learn from it. Now, we don't want other people necessarily to use our sacraments, LSD and marijuana. We're not advocating the use of these. And in our celebrations, which will be playing on January 27th and 28th here in the Bay Area, there'll be no attempt to urge people to use drugs. We are attempting to get people to turn inside, to look within, and to turn on. And we don't care what sacrament people use. Throughout human history, the human race has used an incredible variety of techniques for turning on. They've used flagellation, dance, they've used immobility, solitude, noise, some...
meditation.
Exactly, meditation, fasting, sacramental foods. The interesting thing is that man's attempt to turn on just staggers the imagination. There's hardly anything that hasn't been used at one time or another, in one culture or another, to get this experience. And often the most opposite things have been used. It's well known that overstimulation, noise, and crowds is one way of flipping you out of your external mind within. On the other hand, silence and silence.
Mobs, in other
Mobs, yes, or chanting, or you get a large group together, you get a kind of hypnotic effect. Sexual renunciation is one method. On the other hand, ritual use of sex, where the mates become gods and goddesses for each other, is another. Of course, throughout human history, men have used chemicals, plants, vines, roots. Wine itself was originally a sacrament to turn people on. So we don't care what method people use. We treasure and glorify any method that can get you high, that is, can turn you on. But we also insist that no one tell us we can't use our sacrament if it seems to work for us.
Well, now, there are a number of aspects of this that I would like to ask some fairly frank questions about. I have heard it stated, and with some understanding, that some of the people who become involved with the use of LSD, that it becomes a sort of dead end. In other words, here is an experience which is highly stimulating and extremely exciting in the deepest sense of the word. And the repetition of that experience, the sort of going off in a corner, as it were, mentally and spiritually, becomes some kind of an end in itself. I've heard it stated that quite a number of series of people, for example, who have gotten into this, no longer produce. Now, I'm going to pose a theory, namely that the proper use of such awareness is bound up with what you bring back and implement in the society around you, and that it, as everything can be abused, so could these methods of hyper-awareness be abused, and in fact have been abused, because I presume that black magic is exactly using the same power. And I have the idea that no one creates, either in their life or in any visual outward sense, without submitting themselves to some kind of discipline, either their own or some higher discipline to which they are prepared to submit. Now, where along this line does the creative, in sense of our society, in sense of the world that we live in, how do you tie this all in?
Well, you've raised several points, and I find myself in complete agreement with each point as I followed what you just said. Number one, the internal experience cannot be the final goal. Of course, monastics and people in my profession, shamans and alchemists and people who have attempted to change consciousness for thousands of years have evaded this point. As a matter of fact, in Southeast Asia, there are two schools of Buddhism. Northern Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, says exactly what you've just said. It's one thing to turn on, but then you've got to come back to society and make it show in your behavior. There's another school of Buddhism, and as most of you listeners probably know, Southern Buddhism, which says, no, just stay high all the time. Anything is a trap and we're going back to society. Well, we belong to the school which believes that by your fruits you shall be known. It's inconceivable to us that people could take LSD regularly and not be driven to come back to society and to try to glorify or to express what they have learned.
And what is it that you think they have learned?
Well, it's highly individual. Obviously, And of course, you mentioned the misuse of LSD. It's obvious. Every form of energy that man has invented has been misused. I think the auto engine is misused. I think even radio and television has been misused by most other stations. It's too much to ask that our new form of energy, which is based on LSD, is going to immediately cause everyone to become an ecstatic and productive saint. On the other hand, all we can do is say over and over again, in every lecture and every performance that we give to the public, that discipline and training and a conscientious attempt to express productively is the inevitable result of your LSD experience. And I think that's one of the tragedies, that many people take LSD and are so entranced and delighted by this internal world that they just turn off the external world. And this inevitably leads to tragedy, because you just can't stir up all this energy and get so many ideas flashing without harnessing it up. And if you don't do that, then you get this endless rumination, and you get the so-called LSD freak-out, where the person is just spinning around in his own mind. The motto of our religion is turn on, tune in, and drop out. Turn on, of course, means contact these internal possibilities. Tune in means harness it back in works of art, in works of beauty, in works of harmony. So I couldn't agree with you more when you make these comments about...
And what's the dropout?
Well, this is an easily misinterpreted phrase. By dropout, we mean drop out of meaningless activities. We don't mean drop out of life. We don't mean drop out of the really meaningful behaviors. We're convinced, and I think it wouldn't be hard to prove my point, that most Americans are involved in a meaningless robot assembly line, a series of activities. They don't really know what they're doing and why they're doing it, but they just pushed onto this assembly line, off they go. We tell people to drop out. This is the oldest message of visionary prophets, which happens to be my profession. My trade union has always come back to society and said, look, detach yourself from the immediate travel, and be very careful how you spend your time and in what sort of activity you dedicate your energies. So by drop out, we don't mean just to sit around and grow a beard and discuss the ultimates and philosophy. We mean drop out of the meaningless and tune in to the productive. We live, for example, in a large estate in upper New York. There are 60 of us who have dropped out of American society. We think we have our own country there. In addition to starting our own religion, we start our own country, and we leave our little plot of land. I can say I'm going back to the planet Earth and to the United States, a friendly message of communication. And we are trying to develop a pilot study of how man can drop out, how Americans can drop out of the robot aspects of our society and tune back into the more basic human activities, which are familial, which are tribal, and which are involved in individual acts of beauty rather than huge mass movements of power and efficiency.
I have always suspected that either the great religious teachers were completely irrelevant, or else what they said was not some kind of pious hope, but in fact an observation of fact.
Exactly. That's something else that most Americans and Westerners don't realize, that the science of consciousness is just as regular, just as lawful, and just as complicated as the science of energies outside. One of the early mottos of my profession was a Hermetic code. It was on the emerald tablet of Hermes back in Alexandria. It says, what is without is within. It's simply reminding us that there's no energy transformation that you find outside around you that isn't recorded in protein historical records inside your body. Even when it comes to space exploration, as I have taken LSD and hurtled around inside inner space, there are all sorts of unidentified flying objects, in the metaphorical sense, that whiz by your projectors. All of the political and all of the scientific problems of the external world have been worked out over and over again by your cells and your tissues. And unless you get into some contact with this, we think that you're really kind of a robot just being pushed around and reacting to external forces.
In what role and at what level of that role do you visualize yourself, Dr. Leary?
Well, I've given a great deal of thought to that. I think, as I read history, and of course in my profession, which is religious teacher or shaman, you have to look back. We have our tradition, just like the physicist knows about Einstein and Bohr and Newton. I have studied the earlier adepts in my profession, which is the changing of consciousness. I don't think we're ever going to have any more holy men or any more messiahs, and I hope we're not going to have any more martyrs. You see, 1,000 years ago, if someone stumbled on a new method of turning on, maybe it was the Buddha over in India, his original method was the sit-down. He sat under that tree and stayed there till the sit-in. He found a method, and he came back and he taught it. Well, by the time that method and that the name of the Buddha reached the Mediterranean, it was maybe 100 years. Slave galleys and folk singers, and it's always the young and the lower class and the alienated that carry the message. By the time it got over the Mediterranean, the Buddha was perhaps 2 or 3 generations dead. So then you set him up as a special person who had a virgin birth or a miraculous death and so forth. That's not true. He was just a human being struggling to find meaning the way the rest of us are. Now, in the present technological age, you see, that's never going to happen. When we announced the formation of our religion in New York 3 months ago, at 10 o'clock in the morning, by 10:10 it was on the news ticker in London, and 10:15 it was on the news ticker in Tokyo, and probably 10:17 it was on the news ticker in Peiping, and they were wondering, like, what are they doing over there now? There's no more room for mythological, supernatural religious teachers. I'm simply an American of Irish descent with all of the faults and virtues of my time and culture, struggling for meaning, and we have got a method which works for those people who know how to use it, so that I don't see myself as a historical figure in this old sense. We're not going to have any of these legendary
Messiahs.
Yeah, that's right. I think that religion in the future is going to be much more personal. Every man should start his own religion. That's my advice to young people today. Don't think it was all done 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago. The great challenge of human life is really to found your own religion. That means you personally cast off your tribal mind and come to real tissue and fleshly grip with these ancient problems. And you hammer out your own ethical code on your tablets of whatever they are. You become your own Copernicus. You probe these mysteries yourself and come out with your own answers. Now, you're going to come out with pretty much the same answers that Christ and the Buddha came up with, because that's the science of it. There are certain basic truths, but you can't take them in cliche, static form. Nobody can pass on these truths to anyone else, so they're just meaningless formula. You have to have your dark night of the soul. You have to have your LSD flip out. You have to wonder what's real, who am I, and then slowly you're going to have to recapitulate the evolution history of the human race yourself, LSD is, and come out with your own prayers, your own rituals, which work for you and your family and perhaps a few friends. That's the excitement of it, and we deplore the mass conformity of most religions today, which become just like General Motors and NBC television.
Live and let live. Yeah. Well, in California, we terribly dangerous carbon monoxide or smog. And DDT, that's a really dangerous drug.
On March 16, 1970, Dr. Leary was convicted in Orange County, California, of possession of marijuana and was sentenced to 6.5 months to 10 years in state prison. On Sunday, September 13, 1970, the Associated Press reported that Dr. Leary, whom it described as a well-known advocate of psychedelic drug use, had apparently escaped late the preceding Saturday night from the California men's colony at San Luis Obispo, where he was serving his sentence. Officials at the prison said Dr. Leary was first missed at the midnight bed check, and they added that they did not know how he had escaped. They said that Dr. Leary had been transferred the previous May to San Luis Obispo, which is a minimum security prison, because he was not believed likely to attempt escape, and they described him as a model prisoner.
Speaking to you from Lamadrag, a beautiful fishing port outside of Algiers, Algeria. My escape from prison and Rosemary and my escape from the country was engineered, executed, designed, and aesthetically carried off by the noble and beautiful Weatherman Underground. And since we've been in Algeria, we have been under the wise, benign, and loving protection of the Black Panthers, led by the genial genius, Eldridge Cleaver. It is true that in the company of Field Marshal D.C., of the Black Panther Party, and Jennifer Dorn, and Marty Kidder, I embarked on an adventurous trip throughout the Middle East to visit the Palestinian guerrillas. All statements that we were ejected from Arab countries or received hostilely are distortions and lies by the wicked, pig, capitalist bourgeois press. We were received every place with fraternal arms. Live and let live. We say to every human being, black, white, left, right, brother, sister, live and let live. Human brothers and sisters, let's live and let live.
Dr. Leary's appearance in Algiers and his association with the intercommunal section of the Black Panther Party attracted a great deal of attention from the media and from the public at large at the time. Shortly after Dr. Leary announced that he was in fact in Algiers, Babaram Das, Dr. Richard Alpert, a former associate of Dr. Leary's, was interviewed by editors of the Psychedelic Review, and one of the topics of their conversation was the radicalization of Tim Leary.
Can you talk a little bit to us about the radicalization of Timothy Leary? We're doing an article in the next issue on this. What do you think were the specific reasons for his departure from previous commitment toward consciousness of nonviolence and spirituality?
What did you say, Dorchester or Oxford?
Dorchester and Roxbury.
And his departure.
First, born in Roxbury, raised in Dorchester.
Okay. Timothy is a extraordinarily high mystic visionary. Timothy is not a realized being. There is work Timothy yet has to do on himself before all his seeds of attachment are cooked. And thus any statement that comes from Timothy, just like any statement that comes from me, is only as pure as we are at the moment. In some way it reflects where we're not. From the time of the bust in Laredo, which was not a pure test case, and Timothy was told that, Timothy felt that he had to carry the standard, and in a way was perfectly conscious of his legend And it fit in very much harmony with his whole way of relating to authority and to establishment and to law. And the article that we wrote back in 1961 or 2 in the Harvard Review called The Politics of Consciousness, really defines exactly what Timothy saw as the choice. And he said the visionary would be closer to the prison than to the professor's chair. Because he saw that change involved overthrow. There are other ways in which evolution occurs than overthrow. And in a way, Timothy has been having a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because to be busted once, he had the choice then of making a test case or not. He chose to make it. Then being busted again and again and again and again merely shows a total disregard of the system, or at least a definition of himself in a very powerful model role, perhaps martyr, perhaps not, but a very strong role. Tim's letter, Tim walking out of jail, felt to me, knowing Timothy, like an exquisitely pure act. Done beautifully. It was awesome that the sheriff or whoever runs the prison said when Dr. Leary left, there was no violence and no property destroyed. But he did it so exquisitely. And I think all of us, Allen Ginsberg and Wavy Gravy and all the people that I've talked to that have been doing this merry dance, honored Timothy for the high-flying act of just walking out of a prison. He served 6 months, he asked for parole, it was not granted, and he walked out. At the same moment, all of us had a feeling of trepidation that have lived with, I know Timothy, because from then on, his game must be so exquisitely disciplined that any one flaw in the whole thing, and he either ends up dead or in prison for the rest of his life. Because when they get him this time, they throw away the key. Maximum security. Now, and all of us who know Timothy know that one of the qualities where he isn't really cooked is discipline. That his mind is beautiful, but it moves very wide-ranging and rapidly, and he drops and moves and changes and goes. And perhaps what he could have done as a disciplined being was disappear into the woodwork and become somebody else. Since he had just published a record, Douglas Records, saying you can be anything this time around, he had the option of becoming somebody else, which could have been done. But in a way,
by somebody else who while out of prison, he could have assumed a different type,
a different identity, and then either built a whole thing on a new identity, or been through the underground, released material, and just become a secret word appearing, and all the time living in the world as somebody else. That would be the exquisite, that's the dance I think I would do where I was different. Now, in some way, my interpretation of Tim's letter is that Tim wanted to continue to build and influence and work with the dramatic changes that are occurring in this culture. And he saw that the major 2 high-energy fields at the moment, although a third coming up fast on the rail is the spiritual one, the 2 major ones thus far are the government and the radical movement. And I think what he attempted to do by that letter was to pay his dues to gain membership into that club, into that high-energy field. Now, there are 2 things about the letter that are important. One is that though it advocates violence, when you read it, you do not feel violent. And that leads you to an understanding that it is no act in and of itself that is significant. It is the who does the act and the consciousness of the person doing the act.
And the consciousness of the person
reading the act. But that also is a function of the person writing. You see, in other words, whether Tim adopts karma for advocating violence is a function of Tim's attachment when he writes the letter. And if Tim isn't attached, the letter doesn't make you violent. It's much more subtle the way the whole thing works, about vibrations of information. And Timothy's letter didn't make me feel violent. At the same moment, it felt like he was making some kind of a pact with the devil to beat the devil, because in the world of polarities, anytime you identify with one polarity, you strengthen the other. Right? Now, but the added point is that Timothy is not a violent man, and he's a very conscious man. And I would like very much to have people like Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton and Seal and all these people hanging out with Timothy Leary rather than just with each other, because I would like to have conscious beings involved in each end of the polarity. And in a way, Timothy may be doing more of a service to the West, you know, in just becoming maybe the resident poet for the Black Panthers, you know, and that the letter may be his dues. I've also noticed the amount of discontent and upset and confusion that letter's created. And I appreciate that very much, because that kind of confusion is good, healthy work on individuals, because they had Timothy in one bag and Eldridge Cleaver in another bag, and they're forced now to deal with a Malcolm X phenomenon of a really beautiful being who is still saying very radical things.
They are forced to it, and also, as you say, Eldridge Cleaver and the socialist countries that he will be visiting will be exposed to Timothy Leary now, and it'd be very interesting.
Exactly. Now, Timothy may get caught in spinning out in the scene, and he's doing a very funny dance now. I mean, this latest thing with Lebanon and Palestine, and nobody wants him, and Algiers doesn't want him back. And
is that true?
That's the latest I heard from his son yesterday. And it may well be that he never defends his back on these things. You'd see, that's the exquisite part of a high dancer like Timothy. But they often burn up like, what are those, shooting stars, they burn up going across the heavens. And, there's Wilhelm Reich, and there's Ezra Pound, and there's lots of, there are lots of beings around as models of what happens, of how fierce the whole trip is. And I just read Eldridge Cleaver's Conversations with Eldridge Cleaver in Algiers, and it's no picnic. Tim's trip is no picnic.
I would imagine that people do discover that here, even despite certain repression, is still one of the freest places in the world.
Well, I had a long talk with Tim's son yesterday, who talks about the pigs and the tremendous anger towards everybody. The same moment, he owns Tim's house, right? I said, well, then you certainly don't mind if I come and take your house away. He says, well, I'm not a pig. I said, well, how do you know you're not a pig? You own a house, don't you? Aren't you a landowner or property owner in Berkeley? And it's a very clear, it's such a delicate thing about the amount of energy that's available in the society, and how we only use old models, and we have more energy. It's just the son cutting the balls off daddy, that's all. And when he gets in the position, then he runs the ship, just like he becomes the new daddy. And there are very few radicals that I would like to serve under, in terms of having them form my government, because there aren't wise men at either pole at the moment.
But you said before something about a self-fulfilling prophecy to Timothy Leary's life, but his lawyer, one of the lawyers, Joe Ryan, kept emphasizing how bugged he had become in the past few years with this legal hassling, and that this was one of the main reasons why he had reached this type of decision, that it was not something he was trying to bring on himself. And his lawyer said that this last incident in Orange County, the evidence was planted by the police.
Well, that well may be, and I think that part of what's happened is it's a combination of, you see, the history I'm working out of is I remember being called into the chairman of the department's office at Harvard, and them saying to me, look, you're a close friend of Tim's. We love him very much. We know he's a great intellect, but man, he's completely screwing up the system. And if you don't control him, we're going to have to get rid of him, because we can't handle him, because he's too disruptive of all the structure of the games. It's as if all structure at all was too much for Timothy. I mean, I lived with years of bounce checks You know, I mean, there's nothing to do with that. That bounds, you don't have to be against the bank system. You know, I mean, when you write checks you don't have money for, I mean, that to me doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel vibrationally right. I don't care, you know, I don't think that's economically radicalism. That's just, you know, like that's not being willing to play any games at all.
Well, poorly organized. But
and I feel in a way that Timothy was hassled tremendously. There's no doubt about it. And Timothy is right in the sense that what the guarantees in this country guarantee freedom and the right to happiness and privacy, and he is very obvious in his reiteration of Thomas Jefferson, really, the Jeffersonian ideal, how much has been lost in the shuffle. And he had an exquisite possibility of doing a very high dance in his running for governor in California.
Right.
In the whole reiterating the Thomas Jefferson thing.
What happened to that?
Well, he got into so much legal hassle, he got put in prison, and then he couldn't do it.
James Curley ran for mayor.
Of course, we know James Curley well. And in a way, that's what I mean about lack of discipline. You see, because Timothy's power didn't necessarily have to do with the way he was living. I mean, there were very few people coming through the gates of the ranch or the places that were getting busted. That was just Timothy's own kind of looseness of living, because he was going to live it. His life was going to be a model. Right. And that is something that he kept losing his degree. He kept losing the cards in his hand every bust he get.
And this is what I'm trying to get clear in my mind from talking with you now about this, and the way that you speak of it on a level of as if you were absent-mindedly getting into all of this trouble and fulfilling the self-fulfilling prophecy, rather than it seems that something about
man, when I'm Timothy Leary, I don't cross into Mexico carrying pot. That to me is sloppy. I mean, I'm a game player. I was an LSD smuggler for years, man, and I know how to play exquisite games, and Timothy's game is sloppy. If Timothy is playing...
Well, but aren't the games of prophets always sloppy? They're always getting killed, aren't they?
Not necessarily. Only the ones that get killed get killed.
They're the ones that you remember.
You know, well, you remember the killing.
Right.
You don't have to turn the tables over in the temple unless that's your trip. You happen to be the table turner over. And that's who Timothy is. See, before Timothy took any drugs at all at West Point, Timothy spent like 9 months where nobody at West Point would talk to him and he would talk to nobody because he had broken one of the rules and he wouldn't leave. And he demanded an apology, a public apology in the dining hall before he'd leave. And after 9 months of all beat the system, they publicly apologized, and the next day he left.
He was teaching there?
No, he was a student.
He was a student at West Point?
Yes.
I never knew that.
And he went over the wall for a chick or a bottle or something one night, and he had broken the code of the academy.
Look, I don't want to spend all our time on Timothy. I wanted really to get to you.
Let's just say one more thing. I mean, at the other end of the coin is that Timothy's life is becoming a very powerful statement about those freedoms. You know? And to the extent that it is pure, it will serve to help us check back into our baseline. To the extent that it isn't pure, that it was an ego act of Tim's, it won't. Because that's the way communication works. Communications come through as high as the beings who communicate. There's a whole other level at which the game is played.
Independent.
And so that all of the, as I go around the country, all the hundreds and hundreds of people that have come up and said, hey, where's Timothy Leary at? And when I say, well, why do you ask? They say, well, man, he writes this beautiful stuff, but there's something about it. Well, that is true. There is something about him. And everybody that's ever lived with him has said the same thing. There are places in Tim where he doesn't work on himself. And whether he can't or he doesn't or what, but this is the way it is. all of his wives, his children, me. I mean, all of us have shared that feeling. And I've had many acid trips with Tim, and I've been inside his head really deep.
This brings us, maybe it's a good point of departure again for...
This will be strongly edited, I assume, to make it all flow.
I hope so.
You can use anything I say publicly, but
Yeah, we will do that. We'd be happy to send it to you beforehand.
Timothy and I had a great evening about a year ago in Berkeley in which we sat around and he'd say, I hear you said this. And I said, yeah, I hear you said this. And we kept doubling the game, getting farther and farther out. It was a beautiful thing because we've been traveling in these separate overlapping spheres for years.
Right, but this is your own in a sense, radicalization from that previous stage of your life where you and Timothy broke the ground for the whole cultural revolution. And
well, in all fairness, let's point out very clearly that Timothy broke the ground. I was a student. I was a co-faculty member, and I took care of the kitchen, the children, the relations with the administration, and the bank statements, right, and the neighbors, and the garbage, and the dogs, and the whole thing of it that Jewish mothers do. But man, his was the vision, his was the consciousness, and I rode his coattails through the whole psychedelic thing. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was his book. He just put my name on because I cleaned the kitchen well. I mean, that's really been our role. In fact, I defined in 1961, I thought to myself, I've never met a great man before, and this is one of them, and it is enough for my life merely to serve such a being. And I'm perfectly happy to just do it. And for 2 years, I kept doing that until suddenly I saw that there was a destructive quality in Tim's game, and that no matter how beautiful it got, it kept being converted into some horror all the time. And then I kept feeling, he kept saying, that's the way it's got to be. And in my heart, it didn't feel like that's the way it had to be. We didn't have to have police and bill collectors and lawyers and the whole thing and all this chaos all the time. Chaos, you know. And so at that point, we split apart. And once we had split, my life just started to flow out. And for about 6 or 8 months, I was in traumatic shock, really. Feeling, well, I was working as a computer programmer, right? And I thought I'll just do my gig and maybe I'll become a chauffeur or something and I'll just mind my own business because I've had enough of the trip, you know, okay, I did it. And then I suddenly started to see that I had a consciousness too, you know. I mean, that was the first time that I ever started to redefine what my role was to be.
We say to every human being, black, white, left, right, brother, sister, live and let live.
How Dr. Leary has constantly tried to relate to us that he seems to take himself seriously as the high priest of the revolution. That he, in some sense, sees himself as sort of a secular god around which the universe is constructed, around which the revolutionary movement inside of the United States evolved. And also, after many discussions with him on the subject of drugs, and the relevancy of drugs, specifically LSD assets as a weapon in a revolutionary struggle, I've come to the conclusion that Dr. Leary is irrevocably wed to the idea of the beneficial aspects of LSD in the context of a revolutionary movement, that he would rather die than give up the idea of changing American society by dosing everyone with LSD. Well, this is not a principle or a suggestion that we in the Black Panther Party can in any way endorse, because we think that it's absurd and unrealistic as an approach to carrying out our struggle. Leary seems content to continue advising people to turn on, tune in, and drop out. And that he really means it when he says that freedom means getting high.
Right.
While this is in direct conflict with the needs of the American Revolution, is we feel that we need people with clear heads, sober people who have their wits about them, because we're confronted with murderous, fascist pigs who will stop at nothing and who have so much manpower at their disposal that they're able to change shifts on us. Each crew putting in 8 hours a day while we ourselves are not able to do that. So it's not realistic or serious to suggest that people try to deal with the situation in the United States by taking acid trips or other drugs or being high at all in any way, shape, form, or fashion. People who have taken a close look at what the Black Panther Party has stated in the past will notice that when we condemn the use of harmful drugs, that we do not include marijuana in that category, because there are many of us who like to get high on marijuana once in a while. But this does not mean that we advocate a constant state of being high or intoxication. That we want to make it absolutely clear, we do not advocate people indulging in revolutionary activity while under the influence of drugs of any type that is harmful to our cause. And the use of drugs under the present circumstances should be viewed as counter-revolutionary activity. This does not mean we do not recognize the progressive role played in the past by the whole youth drug culture in the United States, that it was very useful some years ago when people rebelled against the straitjacket rules and regulations of Babylonian society by turning away from the standards and the values of that society, and by shattering into smithereens those values by getting high, freaking off, whatever you want to say, whatever terminology you want to use, that at a certain point in our struggle, this was a progressive step to take. But things have changed since then. It is no longer useful to our struggle, and it has to be stopped, it has to be dealt with, and we take a dim view of it and we want nothing to do with it, and we want to see it ended. We want people to gather their wits, to sober up, and to get down to the serious business of destroying the Babylonian Empire. And this is what we must do, and this is our duty. On January the 9th of 1971, I issued an order to Field Marshal D.C., who works in our intercommunal section here in Algeria, to go to Leary's apartment and to take Leary and his wife Rosemary to another location and to confine them there until further notice. And since that time, Dr. Leary and Rosemary Leary have been placed in I don't really know the term to use, but we could say that on January the 9th, we busted Leary. Leary is busted. He and Rosemary. At one point, he was talking to Rosemary about the situation, and he said, they're just some niggas flexing their muscles. The point is that in using drugs as an escape, trying to use drugs as a way of dealing with the reality, the horrible reality of oppression in Babylon, it serves the function of escaping from that reality, but it has the harmful side effect of leaving many contradictions unresolved. And in the case of Leary, I think he symbolizes this for us, and we've had time to very carefully observe Leary's reactions and behavior through this very close association we've had with him over these months. And we find that although he's able to make political gestures and political statements, that essentially the man is apolitical and opportunist, and he has a very deep strain of racism, white racism in him, which comes out in very surprising form, and which he thinks goes undetected. And although I have no pretensions of being a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it has become very clear to me that there's something seriously wrong with both Dr. Leary and his wife's brain. And I attribute this to the uncountable number of acid trips that they have taken. And it makes me very sad looking at this situation, because while on the one hand I like Leary, I like Rosemary, but objectively I find them both to be non-functional in a political context, not helpful, and really we have grown to look upon them sort of as patients, sort of as responsibilities that we have to take care of. Also, we've noticed that they're very dangerous people, because whatever the use of LSD has done to their brains, one thing that is very clearly done is it destroyed their ability to make judgments, particularly in the area of security, so that we are forced to constantly use manpower to to watch them. We've had to separate them from various enemies that they've gotten themselves involved with. Yes, we had to bust Timothy and Rosemary. And we have to take care of Timothy and Rosemary. And we will do that too. As long as Timothy and Rosemary remain in Algeria, they will have the protection of the intercommunal section of the Black Panther Party. And that's the only protection that they have. They don't understand that, but we do. That all of us who are out here, our very survival is dependent upon a political situation, and that's all. Because the U.S. imperialists, fascists, have armies of agents scrounging and crawling all over the planet Earth, making trouble for progressive forces. And they are finally focused in on us here, and they're trying to move against us. They're trying to destroy us here. And it's for that reason that we can no longer tolerate the stupidity from Leary. And by busting him, letting him know that we're serious about that. He sees this as a contradiction. He thinks that a prison is a prison, confinement is confinement. I find it ironic for myself, having spent long years in prison myself, not relating to it, not relating to imprisonment or confinement, but yet finding myself in a position where I had to make the decision to bust Timothy Leary. I say this half jokingly because he will be released tomorrow. He will be allowed to go back to his apartment tomorrow. He will be liberated tomorrow. But this machinery that we have in our hands is revolutionary machinery. And Leary has received a revolutionary bust. He escaped from a reactionary bust in Babylon, came to Algeria, and now he has suffered a revolutionary bust. That's exactly what it was. The man was busted. We busted him. And it's acceptable to us. We see it in Leary's behavior and his attitude. A good example of the opportunism of the white section of the American Revolutionary Movement. Something has to be stopped.
Harrison, KMET. You're listening to Harrison's Mic. Coming up at 7, we have Telephone Talk. And right now, as promised, excerpts from a recent conversation I had in my famous backyard studio with Dr. Timothy Leary.
Having known you over the years, and you've been on the show before, we've always talked about this ongoing autobiography. And I would imagine it's hard to write an autobiography when your life every day takes on new and exciting challenges and wrinkles. But you finally did it, and here it is. And I'd like to show this to our viewers. Flashbacks, an appropriate title, an autobiography by Timothy Leary. How do you feel about it?
I'm very pleased, Mike. As you know, I've written 22 or 23 books in the past, mainly scientific or philosophic or specialized. And this is the first attempt to explain to myself and to anyone who wants to read the book what's been going on in the last 20 years. And I'm very proud of the book. I've been very lucky to have a publisher, J.P. Tarcher and Houghton Mifflin, who have the advantage of nationwide distribution, but close personal editing and affectionate help. So a lot of wonderful minds went into the making of the book, and I'm very pleased with it.
Was it difficult for you to tell stories? Because you're a very good storyteller. A lot of your other books are marked by very abstract concepts, and it takes a few readings to be able to follow some of the new ground that you cover in your philosophy and your scientific observations and your philosophical observations. This is a great story. Now, I've read as much of it as I could. It just came into my hands, and I understand it's one of the first interviews you're doing.
This is appropriate enough. The first interview I've done for this book, and since we've been together in the past so much, it's very appropriate that we should be here in the sunshine.
Which is an honor for us, and we're very pleased.
Me too.
But was it difficult for you to sit down and tell a story on paper, as opposed to spill out all of those perceptions that you have?
Well, it was very easy. In the past, as you point out, most of my books have been... I'm basically a philosopher-scientist, and I've introduced an enormous number of very complicated ideas about the future, most of which I think have actually come true. But I feel my great failing in the past is I've not been able to communicate to like the average person. And there are many images about me or perceptions about me or myths about me that simply are inaccurate because people have not had the chance to read my book. And I discovered in sitting down to write the story of my life that, yes, I am a storyteller. And I blame this entirely, I'll confess to you right in front, it's all due to the fact that I'm Irish, Celtic, and that old Blarney thing is, now sit down, my dear, and I'm going to tell you a story of exactly how it was back there in 1966 when John Lennon and I met. And I've never done that before. I was trying to be too uptight and too serious and too political at times. So this it was a tremendous amount of fun. Actually, I wrote 2,000 pages, and we had to cut it down to something like 600 or 700 pages.
And I noticed at the end it says to be continued.
Well, of course, life is to be continued, and I'm pro-life and I'm pro-future, and it's appropriate. And this book has no ending; it's still going on.
My feeling about you is that you're pro-freedom. If Timothy Leary had to be, which is an impossible task, but if it had to be, if we had to come up with one word or one statement to describe you and what you are for, I would say freedom. You seem to be a champion of individual freedom, even if that freedom may be dangerous, ill-advised,
risky.
You
controversial.
Would you say that I'm on the right track?
I would say you're exactly on the right track. What my life is about, what my book is about, is the concept of individual freedom. I think that's what America's about. I think that's what human life is about. And
but there's always those forces to stop that.
Yes, and when I say freedom, individual freedom, I must clarify. See, I'm having these debates these days with G. Gordon Liddy. Perhaps we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
He defends the power and authority of the state to decide what's good for all of us, and I'm defending the right of the individual to live her life or his life according to what feels, in the deepest soul sense, right for them. But this does not mean anarchy. I think that my freedom ends where your freedom begins, and I have no right to impose my ideas and my thoughts on you. The paradox is that those of us who believe in individual freedom have the responsibility to respect it in others as well. And I want to make sure that the audience understands.
That's an important point, because so many people who are spokesmen for freedom, particularly libertarians, in terms of it actually being institutionalized into a political party, are borderline anarchists. And, of course, without getting into a whole sociology, political science lesson here, or lecture here, the ideal society is a balance, I think, between individual freedom and that which is best for the society as a whole. So you want to clarify that you're not an anarchist, which I'm sure a lot of people believe you are.
Well, I've had now in this book my chance. I've got 400 some odd pages to tell the entire story of my life, beginning when I'm a sperm, 1 minute after my conception. And,
do you remember?
Yes, how my sperm met my mother's egg, and it goes on from there. So I've had my chance to explain. And these we've all been through very difficult, paradoxical times. You can't simplify what's been going on in America for the last 10, 15, 20 years. But my concept of freedom is basically American, and how I support people disagree. I disagree totally, for example, with Ronald Reagan's notion of what it means to be American. To him, America means run around the world stamping out anyone that disagrees with you and so forth. To me, an American means to be an individual, and as you learn when you read my book, my first heroes were Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and they represent to me what America's all about, and Becky Thatcher too. Irreverent, out there in the frontier, youthful in spirit, thumbing your nose irreverently at authority that tries to be uptight. But that's
much of that comes from education, doesn't it? Being literate. I understand that you were.
By the way,
go
ahead.
No, you go ahead. That's all right.
That's what America was the first country to institute full-scale public education, and sometimes we forget that we were the first people on the earth to insist that, again, everyone has a chance. The individual has the opportunity to get educated, and
which is a vital part of democracy.
It's a key part,
which a lot of people totally ignore. And I'd like to get into your perceptions of education today and the youth of America in the 1980s as we roll on. But I understand that you and your family, when you were a kid, were the first to really be literate. There's a tale in your book. I noticed that your grandfather, I believe it was, said, "You read, son. You're going to go far. I'll give you." Could you share that with us a bit? That little anecdote.
Well, I came from two middle-class Irish Catholic families in Massachusetts, of all places. Imagine, that's a pretty uptight situation. I was born in 1920, and the Larry family was, they were all fairly well educated, but the Larry family was, they believed in freedom. Everyone out and did their own thing, and my mother's family, they thought that the Larrys were selfish because all the priests and the educators came from the Ferris family. And my grandfather had a library, and he found me reading one day in his library, which no one went into, and he came over and he took me aside and told me that education would free me, and that don't think what other people think, and develop your own mind and kind of do your own thing. So I'm rather proud of my grandfather. I got a picture of my grandfather, by the way. There are about 32 or 40 pictures of my
nice section, I noticed that.
And so that I'm paying tribute to my parents and my grandparents who belong to that tradition of American immigrants. They came over here from the old country and kept it going.
Yeah, I never realized that you were at one time a baby, which you've now proven. This little baby with your face on. But today, now, I do many lectures and talk programs and seminars with young people, and have been doing so for a long time. And as you get older, it's a task to try to keep an equilibrium and seeing how the 60s relate to the 70s to the 80s without becoming subjective.
Yeah.
And I find that while in the 60s and the 50s, the 50s and the 60s and the early 70s, it was still very in among young people to want to go to school and to read and to study and to become educated, there seems to be a reversal of that trend. Certainly, scholastic aptitude tests indicate that as a nation, our level of education is sinking, isn't progressing. Now, I know you're very optimistic about the future and always have been, but do you think we face an educational crisis in this country that could undermine our freedom?
Well, of course, this is a very complicated topic, and I'm not sure we can settle it in 2 or 3 minutes here glibly. But there is an educational problem now because the Reagan administration is simply cutting funds for research in science and for education. And the key to a successful democracy is educated, scientifically minded populace. So there is a crisis there, but it's a political crisis. But as far as the young people are concerned, I spend, of course, a great deal of time giving college lectures. And the middle-class kids that are allowed economically to go to school are working 10 times harder than they did in the 60s.
They are.
They're extremely realistic. And the concepts of excellence, that's partly because of competition, because there are 76 million members of that baby boom generation. There simply aren't jobs for them. So that the attitude today in colleges is very different from the 60s. They work really hard from Monday through to Thursday night. And from Thursday night to Sunday, they play very hard. So they're actually farther out in some ways than the kids in the 60s.
It's just they schedule themselves differently.
Exactly.
And in the 60s, it was a mixture of work and partying, I guess. Or...
I think they're realistic. The bottom line for college kids today is they're realistic. Now, I'm speaking here of the fortunate 50% who can go to college. The real tragedy is that the funds needed and the hope and the support needed to help the poorer kids get educated is desperately lacking, and I trust something will be done about that. And of course, another thing that's happened, Mike, that has totally changed the education situation is the introduction of computers. And I read some interesting statistics. I'm very much involved in computers. To me, computers are the drugs of the 80s. What drugs were to open your mind intelligently in the 60s, computers are now. And opinion studies show, this is fascinating, that like 80% of kids under the age of 16 like personal computers. But when you get up to people between 40 and 50, majority of them don't like personal computers. And when you get over 60, like 80% of them don't like.
This could be the whole new generation gap of this next era.
And when you talk about a generation, how can you not like a personal computer? But
well, maybe you can share, as this program goes on, some reasons why some of the elders in our audience should turn on to computers.
We're listening to a conversation I recently had in my backyard with Dr. Timothy Leary, Harrison. We're KMET 94.7. Coming up at 7 o'clock this morning, we'll have our telephone talk segment of Harrison's Mic until 9 o'clock. And I do hope you give us a call and share your thoughts about whatever it is that's on your mind. In the meantime, here's a conclusion of a nice, meaty excerpt from a conversation I recently had with Dr. Timothy Leary.
Dr. Leary, you mentioned that computers are your thing right now. They're the drugs of the 80s. Before we get into computers, I'd like to ask you a straight question about drugs. My interpretation, knowing you now for about 6 years, having spoken to you, is that the drugs just happen to be a catalyst for your own exploration of human potential and different levels of awareness. If it weren't drugs, it could have been anything else. That you're more interested in people opening their minds than they are necessarily to take drugs for the sake of drugs. Is that a reasonable estimation of your view?
Well, yes, it is. Of course, as you and I and the audience well knows, it's almost impossible to be reasonable about drugs. Everyone, immediately their minds, you say that magical, terrible word, and immediately everyone goes one way or another. I'm basically a psychologist. I'm interested in anything that can help change a person's mind, because that's the key to everything. You can change your mind, you can grow. I'm interested in personal development, personal growth. As you know, I was one of the founders of the entire school of psychology, which is now known as personal growth. So drugs, to those of us who started our research at Harvard in the 60s, were one way of expanding consciousness, increasing intelligence, accessing different circuits in your brain, and they're tools, just like telescopes or microscopes or computers. Then the recreational use of drugs came in as a popular movement, and again, as a libertarian, and as one who believes in individual choices, I think that it's up to the individual to decide when and with whom and why they want to use drugs. Society and state has nothing to say about it. All I can do as a philosopher and a scientist is to urge, if you're going to use drugs, and of course, 2/3 of you under the age of 40 are right now using illegal drugs. If you're going to use drugs, use them intelligently, prudently, wisely, planfully, as part of an overall life scenario, so you know what you're doing. And all I can say about drugs here is what I've said over the years, and which I've made clear in my book. Avoid the stupid use of drugs as you would avoid the stupid use of guns or of motor cars.
That really puts it in perspective. That's very clear.
Yes, and of course, the issue of drugs is complicated because, what do you mean by the word drug? Right now, 2/3 of middle-class housewives use Valium, there's a big cocaine problem. Where? On Wall Street, and in the Congress, and in movie executives. Even LSD meant one thing in 58, when Cary Grant was running around Hollywood, the #1 salesman. As I point out in my book, I had several interviews with Cary Grant, and I was a latecomer on the block. Cary Grant was the #1 advocate of LSD. Why? Because he was using it intelligently, he was using it moderately. As part, he attributes to LSD his growth and his opening up in his later years. That's one thing for Cary Grant to say that, or Henry Luce, who, as you know, founded Time and Life magazine. He and his wife Claire Booth Luce were using and endorsing, publicly advertising LSD in the early 60s. Why? Because they were intelligent people using these drugs intelligently. And then you get 1970, when there were 7 million young people using what they thought was LSD, but there wasn't that much LSD around, using God knows what, sugar cubes laced with strychnine or speed. So the word LSD means two entirely different things depending upon who, where, when, and why.
I'm pleased that you were able to qualify that subject, because that remains an area of misunderstanding about you.
I can't believe, number one, there isn't the panic about drugs in this country now that there was in the 60s. Most people are pretty cool about it. People know what they're doing, except for Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan. The real drug problem in this country today is that last week, I'm talking now middle of May 1983, Ronald Reagan endorsed the poisoning of domestic marijuana crops using paraquat. He's using taxpayers' funds to poison the marijuana that's being smoked by
Americans.
Yeah, it's the third marijuana industry, the third largest industry in the country. I can't believe that this sort of a drug problem could exist.
And Congress just reversed its reversal on that, I understand. So it looks like paraquat is back into our lives.
We're paying taxes so they can poison us and our children. Interestingly enough, in Spain, which for years, Spain was the most reactionary country. Remember Franco? Saturday Night Live.
He's still dead?
Yeah, Saturday Night Live, remember that. He's still dead. Yes, Spain of all countries has just totally legalized the possession and individual use of all drugs. I was in Europe for about a month. I went to the Cannes Film Festival and met several people from Spain. You know why? Because the leader of Spain is a young person. You've probably seen his pictures. He's a good-looking, handsome Kennedy-type guy, and he said, "Come on, the problems with Spain are not."
They're greater and different than
possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use.
Right. Do you think that drugs will change in terms of marijuana and so-called limitedly harmful recreational drugs? Do you think that we'll see a change legally in this country? Perhaps Reagan's enforcement of paraquat could be the rallying event for a decriminalization movement. Do you think we're going to roll on with this attitude toward drugs legally in the years to come?
No, it's all a function of age.